post them to the More Good Jobs YouTube channel. And now that I have an intern, take clips of things and share those too, because there's always usually little interesting tidbits that come out of the conversation. So a lot of you guys and girls know me. But for those who don't, my name is James Shomar. I wear a lot of hats. I run actually, I'm assistant director with Mike Doretta here at the Kenyon Center for Entrepreneurship at Lemoyne College in Syracuse. And through that, we run the More Good Jobs community, which was really launched through my friend Martin Babinek, who's been community building, and for a decade he was the founder of TriNet, which is a pretty sizable publicly traded company, and passionate about doing this across upstate for a long time. So that's how I met Joe, which has been over a year now, which is kind of crazy. Think about that. And what Joe, with a lot of Joe's guidance, actually, I should give you a lot of credit for that. More Good Jobs is basically a community for startup community builders. At the end of the day, there's we each are working in our own communities, largely geographically dispersed, difficult to connect with others who kind of practice this craft, especially outside of our own regions. And so it's been really cool having this place to meet other people doing this work, and with just no crazy agenda, meet each other, form friendships, talk about this stuff, commiserate from time to time, and have these kinds of conversations. And I personally learn something from it every single time, not just affecting my community, but even my business. I mean, geez, I'm just thinking about the two times ago, Mike, we picked up a few things that we're literally using in our own business. So it's been extremely valuable. And I'm gonna post somewhat selfishly, promoting More Good Jobs here. I'm gonna share our Twitter in the chat, as well as a quick sign up page. If you're not part of the email distribution and would like to be, we're going to start a newsletter too. Now that I have an intern, she's going to help me with some of that, to kind of have posts and content stuff related to community building, because there really isn't a newsletter for that, that have active startup community builders. Not yet. That is on our list, and we're steadily trying to find other people across the country that do this stuff. Finding that, people, it's like, when I first met Joe invited all the people from Oregon. I've invited a lot of people from upstate, and sort of this regional pockets of people who know each other in their 100-mile proximity, but not a lot of connectivity across. And that was kind of the crazy thing when I met Joe. It was like, holy crap, man, for forever I thought all this stuff that I was doing in upstate New York was in a silo, and we were in this weird realm. And hearing the same stories you'll hear today from Joe, and I'm like, oh my god, we've lived parallel lives for like 10 years, and how do we not know each other? It was kind of wild. But a cool place for any of you to check out and join more events. We try to do about one a week or so, and get chatter going on Twitter around this stuff. So anyway, that's the last for my plug. So really excited to talk with you today, Joe. I always enjoy our conversations, and even though I've known you for a little bit now, we've talked in depth, I bet you I'm going to learn something new. I hope so. I'm sure I will. So I'm going to ask some questions, but if you all have things you want to ask too, please throw them in the chat, and I'll relay that over to him. And as we get through that first round, I think pretty quickly we'll open it up to just sort of general conversation and forum too, as well, because that's always fun. So Joe, why don't you introduce yourself as opposed to me doing a terrible job of it?
Oh man. Presently general partner of Venturing Capital Fund, formerly general partner of Coast to Crest Fund, formerly executive director of Rain Eugene, and the managing director of the Rain Eugene Accelerator. Prior to that, I founded a biotech incubator. Prior to that, I was involved with 2 game startups, both which exited. Just a short version of history. 22 years of working with startups in various capacities.
Cool, man. So although you spent most of your time Oregon, you're originally from
New Jersey. Originally from New Jersey.
Tell us
Born
the
and
story.
raised. The story of being born and raised in New Jersey.
And then finding your way to Oregon. Yeah, I'm curious.
Also, born and raised in New Jersey. Part of this, my dad worked for Bell Labs. I got involved with computers at a very, very young age. So much so that when I started taking computer classes in grade school and high school, they were really, really boring. This is like me coding in C and going to classes that are teaching me basic programming. I sort of checked out. I was at the time also a skateboarder. So like when I went to my first year of college, dropped out almost immediately because I just wasn't ready for college and wasn't digging it. Bought a Volkswagen van and was going to take a year off, travel around the country, and 1 year turned into 6. The trip out to Oregon was mostly in my travels. I was noticing there was an East Coast, West Coast thing going on. East Coast, going around the East Coast, driving around my van, mountain biking, kayaking, rock climbing, meet with people, and I'm like, so what do you do? I'm like, well, I kind of travel around and rock climb and skateboard and live out of my van. And they're like, oh, okay, as they move away. Go out to the West Coast, and I'm like, yeah, I kind of live out of my van. I rock climb and I skateboard. They're like, sweet, like, where do you live? Let's talk business models. How do you make this work? And it was just sort of a more accepting, anything goes type of attitude. So then I was in New Jersey, and what happened was I would travel around for 6 to 8 months, and then sort of get a job for the summer, mostly landscaping. Get a bundle of money and then do it again. And then I ran into a girl that I had met taking photography classes at a community college, and I asked her to come out to Oregon with me, and she agreed, and we moved out to Oregon together in '93. We're now married, have 2 kids, been together for close to 30 years. So moved out there and get a degree in art. So I got a degree in art, started working at a game company, which was just, and everything past then was just serendipitous. Game company I worked for closed, started my own game company. It went very well, got bought by my publisher, formed their internal game studio. That went very, very well. Like everything just sort of rolled from that. But a lot of this, the West Coast was just a place where if you weren't doing the normal thing, it was sort of accepted. So I was attracted to it. That's why I stayed out there for so long. It's like now I'm on the East Coast, I sort of carry that with me, which is the sort of the infectious, yeah, just do it type of, just do it, it's going to work out fine type of attitude. I'm the eternal optimist when it comes to that.
So Eugene specifically was because of the university that brought you in.
Well, it wasn't. Well, this was we had originally traveled out and we were thinking West Coast. We stopped in Boulder on the way out. My wife was like, she didn't like Boulder. She said it felt a little too plastic. And we were thinking Portland, Eugene, maybe Seattle. And we actually arrived in Eugene and met with a friend of mine who had a place there. He was working at the FCA, Fishing Company of Alaska. So he would work in the summers off the fishing boats and then would hang out in Eugene in the winter. And we showed up the first day and he's like, hey, come out to the farm that I'm staying at. We went out to the farm, we set up our tent, and his roommates were like, hey, we got extra tickets to the Dead show. Want to go see the Grateful Dead? Like the first day we were literally there and went there. And so we had a place to live and we're going to a Dead show like the first day. We were there and had met like 20 people by the end of the night. We're just like, well, why don't we just stay here? Just see what pans out. And then, I had my eye on the University of Oregon. It's like I was thinking I'd move to Portland and apply to the University of Oregon. So we were just in Eugene, went to the University of Oregon. There was a professor there that was teaching, art teacher who was really involved in computer graphics at the early stages. So I just got involved in that because at the time I was interested in computer graphics. And I was just sort of following whatever interested me at the time.
Wow. Cool. That's interesting. And I feel like it's got to be atypical for a lot of university college towns where you land in the town and then find the university as opposed to, I'm just thinking about Syracuse. A lot of people who are not from upstate but land in here, it's because, they went to the university and they just happened to stay. You were the opposite.
The opposite. I wanted to be somewhere on the West Coast. And San Francisco and the peninsula were a little too busy for me. So Oregon was sort of like my speed. And at that point, I was rock climbing, racing mountain bikes. So it's like that was my full-time thing, was doing the outdoor sports. And that's right out your back door everywhere in Oregon. And the people too. It's like your next door neighbors are usually a mountain biker or a kayaker or a rock climber or a hiker, bird watcher, you name the thing. A lot of people in Oregon are, the whole town is half centered around running, so it's a really sporty town. So you kind of fit in. I didn't feel like an alien. On the East Coast back then, I really did feel like an alien, like I don't belong here. Oregon felt really welcoming, accepting. So.
Huh. So when you're in, I wouldn't have expected an art degree. That's kind of, I did not know that. I knew you went to U of O. I did not expect an art degree.
Yeah, art degree. Because I was really, it's like I like a whole bunch of stuff. I was really interested in art and design and photography. So I was just like, well, I'll just go for art. And I was really interested in computer art because I was playing with computers a lot. And was really interested in how images are made on the computer. Started going to school. Jurassic Park came out around that time. I just kind of sort of dove in, like, well, how does all this work? Just taught myself about it. So it was really wasn't like, I want to be an artist. It was like, this is interesting to me right now. And the field is really, really young. And, an art degree is sort of like an excuse to play. Luckily, the U of O is, at least back in the day, it was pretty much make up your own degree. In the art school, it was just like, take the classes you want and you can just sort of assemble a degree at the tail end of things when you kind of figured out what you wanted to do. And that was something that I also liked. I was going to school there and, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. The teacher's like, it's okay.
It's what I find interesting is, you haven't mentioned the word startup yet. And yet you were talking the 90s, you're on the West Coast, you're talking about computers, you're running tangential to it. Were you thinking that?
No, I wasn't thinking of startup at all. I mean, so this is like, I was, racing bikes and rock climbing. That was like sort of the focus of my life. Then I got a job at a game company and I was really, I was an intern and I got hired full time. So it's like, sweet, I got a job, didn't even graduate yet. So I was just kind of doing that. And my life was pretty good. I was rock climbing a lot, working at a game company, making really good money. It's like everything just sort of fell in my lap. And I wasn't really thinking of startup. At that point, I never really had considered a startup. It wasn't in my brain. I guess I understood that people had done startups, but I never really thought about it too heavily. Thinking about a startup was actually when I actually started my company. And that wasn't really like, I want to do a startup. It was the company that I worked for closed down. And I got a bunch of job interviews at a bunch of different places and a bunch of offers. And I really didn't want to move to the places they were offering. And I was kind of sick of the games industry, mostly the marketing people. Like everyone I worked with at Dynamics was awesome, but the upper corporate sort of marketing people, I hated it. This came after a pitch that I did for a game called Herd. So I'd worked at this game called Tribes, which is a first-person shooter. And the mandate from on high is like, hey, we're looking for console-style games that are more mass market. So we proposed this game called Herds, which was tribes with animals. So like animal characters with big guns. So essentially it was a console shooter. And our pitch was like Crash Bandicoot meets Tribes. And marketing at the upper level came back with the research that people wouldn't play a game where the main character was an animal. To which I was like, you've never heard of Sonic the Hedgehog? What the F? It was just so that was at that point in time. It was just like more of the same. And what I wanted to do was sort of games on the web. So at this point, I was on the internet all the time, playing around with things, and the dot-bomb had just happened, and we just made some online games that were pretty successful. And I was like, well, I'm going to make online games because they're fun, and I want to build those. And everyone was like, internet's dead, run away. And I was like, no, I think games on the internet are fun. I want to build one. And the first game we did was sort of my opportunity. Was like, okay, this is the only chance I'm ever going to get in my life to make my game without interference from other people. So it wasn't really about doing a startup. It was about making that game, without interference, sort of getting it out there. And then it just turned into a business. And it's like almost immediately after starting it, I sort of found like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. It felt so natural to me to start my own thing. It was very, very freeing. And a lot of it was, if you sort of align this with sort of some of the sports pursuits that I was doing, your success is measured by what you can do. I mean, it's like you can't fake completing a rock climb or doing a trek. You either do it or you don't. And this was, I was very, very comfortable with that. Like, I'm going to succeed doing this or I'm not. And the world is going to decide. It's not my boss or someone in corporate deciding whether or not I'm successful. The world is going to decide. And it's going to be because I did the right things. And if I failed, it's because I did the wrong things. And I'm fully okay with that. So I really, really embraced it. And after that, again, this was the aughts, this was 2001. So learning how to do a startup back then was, there really wasn't anybody to learn. I guess there might have been, but I just did what seemed right, made a lot of mistakes, did some things right. And learned a ton. I mean, you talk about the learning that one experiences when doing a startup. In the 8 years I was involved in startups, like there was a massive amount of learning packed into 8 years. And I loved every second of it. Well, I didn't love every second of it, but in retrospect, I remember all the good things and all the bad things that happened. I kind of they're tiny and small.
How did the team come together around that? Was it people that you were working with at the other gaming company, or?
Right, yeah. So it was me and Clark and Mike. So we were working on the same team, and when it closed down, we just went to start our own company. At the time, Mike had 3 kids, so he stayed like a year and a half and then had to go get a real job. So it was just me and Clark, and then we found people in the community that we hired. I had a friend who worked on our project. He's still a good friend of mine who lived in the Netherlands, who worked remotely for us. I hired one of my students. We hired the guy who ported our game to Linux full time. So we just found people in the community that we were like-minded, sort of brought them into our company.
Wow. Were you raising capital?
No, not at all. I mean, this is like game company in 2001, right after the .bomb. No one would invest in us, and we didn't know how, and there really wasn't an ecosystem to go get capital. We were just bootstrapping. We had a pretty good severance from the game company, and then there was unemployment. So we're had good severances on unemployment and build a game, and we were sort of racing the clock to get it out there, and we got it out there and started to sell, and we bootstrapped the whole way.
Wow.
Yeah, focuses the mind. It really focuses the mind. So,
well, especially for a game, it's not like you can just be in the market right away. There's got to be a ton of development time before you can even see revenue.
It was 9 months to a year. We could have probably done it quicker. I think in the first year we had a whole bunch of partnership discussions, and we were doing consulting work, and there was a bunch of other stuff that we were pursuing that I'll say we weren't as focused in the first year. I think after the first 9 months, 8 or 9 months, we were doing miscellaneous things. We weren't getting anything done. And I think one day I was just like, well, whatever, I'm not going to be doing any of those other things. I'm just going to go work on the game full time. And you guys can do all that other crap. I'm not going to even talk about that anymore. I'm just going to work on the game. And then Clark was like, yeah, at that point, there were 5 people that had joined. And Clark was like, I'm going to go work on that too. And 3 people that would call up, they're good people, but they were just slipped away. And Clark and I sort of focused on, Clark and I and Mike focused and got the game done and got it shipped. And that's where everything came from. So it's just the lesson in focus, a lot of conversations about, oh, maybe we can partner with this company. Oh, there's these people that want to fund a game idea. Endless conversations that just never went anywhere. And I just got tired of it. Just go build the thing. It's the best learning.
Kind of cool and forward looking in 2001 to be thinking across the internet. We're still dial-up days and stuff. It's
well, this is right around the time that cable modems were coming out.
Yeah.
So it's right around that time I was just no, yeah, the internet, pets.com or whatever might be dying, but the internet's around. I was using it daily. We were working remotely from our houses. I was like, no, the internet's going to be a thing.
Wow, cool.
Games aren't going away. Everyone else.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Keep going. Ask questions.
I was just asking, because I'm just trying to put my mindset back into where you were at the time, and recognizing, that's 20 years ago. There's a lot of development, not even just in how we think about startups, but even ecosystems since then.
Yeah, there were no ecosystems. My mindset at the time was very, very personal. And my wife at the time, we had just been married. It was one of those, well, I can go get a job at this company, and this company sounds like a lot more suck. It just sounds like working at another game company with the same producers from on high and upper management. I'm working on a game. Just well, that would be okay, but I want to make the game I want to make. Well, there's, now is the time. And my wife sort of said, hey, we don't want you to have a would have had, that 20 years from now, regretting that you didn't try to do something, that you just sort of took the easy path. She's like, right now, do it. She gave me permission, go do your thing, because I don't want to be hearing for the rest of your life how you could have been a contender. She's like, go do your thing. And I wasn't really thinking long term. I was just like, I'm gonna get this game out. Because I want to make the game I want to make for once in my life. And if this is going to be it. So I felt like I was on a very short clock. I knew we had the money in the bank we had, and it wasn't just to be successful or to make a company. It was like, I need to get this game done before we run out of money. And what comes after is, well, the game's going to sell or it's not. And if it doesn't sell, I have a hell of a resume piece and I'll probably get a job. So I wasn't overly worried if I'd be able to get a job afterwards, but it was really this, I really, really wanted to get it done. And so all this other stuff, thinking about startups and funding and ecosystems, it's like there really wasn't an ecosystem.
So fast forward a bit towards time of the exit. How'd that transpire?
Well, the exit happened because we got bought by IAC, and after about 2 years, I'd gotten my earnout, and then the company was moving to Las Vegas, and I was like, I'm not moving to Vegas. My contract actually had a part of an employment agreement that actually used, if they moved more than 50 miles from the place where they bought us, then I didn't have to go, and I would still get paid. That was right after the 2008 crash, and IAC was doing a sort of 10% across the board headcount reduction. And I went, I'm not going to move to Vegas. I can go. Like, I'm done here. I'm not moving to Vegas. You need a 10% across the board reduction. You can let me go. I'm still actually have an employment agreement. I'm going to get paid. So I was like the sacrificial lamb, where I was like, I'm still going to get paid. Don't lay anyone else off. I will volunteer to be laid off. And I'm not going to move. And I was kind of burnt anyway. I was kind of burnt out. It was 8 years full sprint. And after 8 years, it was like, I'm kind of done here, and needed a break. So the exit happened, company moved. I was getting paid. I actually had a non-compete that I couldn't work. So I took like a year and a half off, went on some long vacations. We had bought a house, was decorating the house, was doing all my hobbies. And after about a year of that, this is like 2010 into 2011, I really was bored out of my mind, like bored out of your mind, and not feeling good about myself. And always tell everyone that the saying is, as free time approaches infinity, the value of that time approaches zero, and your self-worth matches the value of your time. So it's like, I had infinite time and none of it was worth anything, and I was wasting it all. Like, literally meet someone for coffee, and the next day I had to be like, oh man, I better take a break. So the next day it's like a full nap because of the meeting, so it's like I have like 2 meetings a week. And I was just getting bored, and I was like, okay, well, I really like startups. I really like the whole process. I want to do something else. I don't want to be in games. Games at that point were going into mobile, and it was becoming what I would call like gambling. The games I like to do were very creative, and it was becoming this very analytics driven, and I wasn't that interested, but I want to do another startup. So it's like, well, where's the startup community? So I'd run into someone or talk to someone like, oh, I know a guy who did a startup. They'd introduce me to him. I'd have coffee, and the guy's like, well, let me introduce you to another person I know. They'd introduce me to another person who did a startup. And that person would introduce me to a third person. The third person would introduce you back to the first person. So I found there were people doing startups, but there were like groups of 2 and 3 of people who had done things, and wasn't really a community. And that's sort of how it was in Eugene. It's like people who had done actual real things and sold companies, some of them large, that were just in a semi-retired state, kind of like me, kind of, I'm bored. I want something to do. I don't have any friends. I don't have any people that understands this. I'm just going to go like hang out at my house. And it's how I met Shane. So, Shane was one of those people that had exited and was kind of in a state of terminal, perpetual semi-retirement. Shane gets really, really bored, and he has way too much time on his hands. And my exit was good. Shane's was better. As in, I knew at some point I'd need to work again. Shane doesn't. And it's sort of like the blessing and the curse, because he's out of his mind. Just needing something to do. But I met a whole bunch of people like that, and just trying to figure out something to do. I ran into some biotech people that wanted to start something they didn't know, and they were talking about a biotech incubator, and they were trying to figure out how to start it. And I was just like, hey, let's just start one. They're like, we can't just start a biotech incubator. I'm like, you guys don't know how to do startup. Yes, you can. Let's just go rent a place and build a biotech incubator. And they're like, okay. So we went out and found a space, and we actually built a biotech incubator. This was Ferdy Lab. This was 2012 and 2013, and people started showing up. The same time I got involved at the U of O, started showing up at the U of O. They asked me to judge competitions, speak to the classes. I was, speaking in the computer science classes, design classes in the business school, and started judging competitions. There's a program called TEP, the Technology Entrepreneurship Program that I got involved in. So I started to get involved in just about everything startup. And then it was just starting to stitch together all the different pieces. We started doing startup coffee meetups. And this is, when another one of those ones, I was just like, well, I'm just going to meet with people doing startups. I was drinking so much coffee in, say, 2012 and 2013. I thought I was going to get an ulcer. Like every single day I'd go to meet with people downtown, and by 3 p.m. I'm like, like, nice to meet you. And so finally, like, enough of this. If people want to meet with startups, I'm going to be here on Thursday, which is a place called the Barn Light, was the middle of downtown. Like, I'm going to be at the Barn Light on Thursday. If you want to talk startups, just show up then. We'll have a big gathering. And the first one was like 8 people, and the second one was like 17 people. And the third one was like 40, and the fifth one was like 65 people showing up at this coffee shop. And it's like the Barn Light, we'd come in on a Thursday morning at 9. Also, like, whoa, like, what's going on here? And it got to the point where we actually couldn't host them there anymore. Like, we would basically shut the place down. No one else could get in the door. It was like beyond capacity. We also at that point did a pop-up event called Jumpstart. And this is the one we actually, like, where are we going to host an event? It's like, well, there's the lobby over Broadway Commerce Center. Let's just like go into the lobby at the Broadway Commerce Center. People are like, well, how are we going to rent that? I'm like, freaking lobby, man. Just like put signs up and everyone will just show up in the lobby. So we literally just put signs up and people showed up in the lobby, and we had a bunch of boards, and I don't know, a ton of people showed up. I forgot how many to count. It was kind of fun. And there were tons of people that came out, and everyone was interested. And this is when we Pretty Lab became a co-working space, and we started to throw events together to sort of create action. We started doing startup weekends. We started doing an event called Pitch Stream. And all of this was just about 2 things. One was sort of creating the community. 2 is my own sort of getting into the what it is to help startups. Like, when I did my own startup, I was pretty clueless, and most of the people I was meeting were similarly pretty clueless. They didn't know what the hell they were doing. So there was this need that I felt to sort of transmit some hard-earned knowledge to these people. And it's like, you don't even realize what you learned until you start talking to people who didn't go through it. It's like all the things you've forgotten, even the small things. You're just like, oh yeah, you just do this. And I was like, wow, I didn't even know that was a thing. So many of those things where you're just like, okay, in order to help these people, we just gotta find a place to share knowledge. And it just kind of organically came together. Yeah, and I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. That was me sort of just doing it, Eugene, just like beating the drum. Hey, we're doing meetups all the time. And got involved with people in Portland. That's how I met Rick, that's how I met Mitch. We sort of became like the roving Oregon startup guy. And then people started introducing me to other people. Just like startups all over the place. We're just like, hey, Joe, you should talk to Joe. He's pretty good at helping with pitch decks. You should talk to him. So I just, pro bono advising startups. And then this led to RAIN, 2014 state funded accelerator, 2 universities, 2 towns, Corvallis, Eugene, OSU, U of O. They did something to stand up an accelerator. I was already mentoring at Pi in Portland. I had made connections at Techstars in Boulder. I'd talked to a bunch of people about accelerator programs, about incubators, speaking to people all over the nation. And I felt like, hey, you want to stand up an accelerator? So I stood up an accelerator in 2014, put together a cohort, did the whole thing, and got involved in the funding ecosystem. And then that's why we raised a fund. It was just at some point, just like, well, people aren't getting funded to the extent they need to be, and there's no local money. We should put a fund together. And part of this was not just the idea of getting investment out there. This was the idea of getting knowledge about investment out there. So one of the things we did when we raised our fund is, even if we said no to people, we sat down with them for an hour or 2, a couple hours, to sort of say, here's why we're not investing. Here's how we looked at your startup. Here's how we looked at the market. Here's what we think is going to happen. Here's what we think your challenges are. Like, sort of tell them why we said no, and agreed to meet with them afterwards. It's like, this is good. And when people say no for now, it was kind of a no for now, which is like, that, we had people come back after they had tried once or twice, and to correct some of the issues that they had with their startups that we saw. That was very, very important to us. Again, it's raising level of sophistication was the important thing that we needed to do. And we wrote checks, which was also something that helped. Other people would have stopped doing certain things, where we helped fuel some of the ecosystem. And the portfolio is going fairly well. Again, we haven't had any exits yet, but we just went into harvest, so we've got another 6 years to wait and pray. But we think it's doing really well. I think 2, 3 have shut down of the however many we invested in. I don't know the exact number.
So when you launched that, I'm just trying to parse this out more explicitly. Was it your intention to say this is a beacon for the community as opposed to, launching a seed fund? We need more capital. Like, what was the mindset in launching it? Was a multitude?
Oh, the mindset was me, and this is sort of like I don't want to throw other people under the bus, which I'll throw myself under the bus. I'm an impatient person. And so I was involved in this stuff for years, and the conversations that started in 2013 were going into like 2015, 2016, which was called the Capital Formation Group. So you'd meet every couple months with sort of the statewide stakeholders of the Capital Formation Group talking about the need for funding. And it became like this never-ending discussion about the need for startup funding in the local community. And that conversation just kept happening. It's like the same conversation month, every 3 months we get together at the Capital Formation Group. It felt like the same conversation. Some person would leave and some person would come in from another organization. We'd have to get them up to speed, and everyone would do their 10-minute introduction in an hour meeting, and then we talk for like 15 minutes, and then 3 months later, lather, rinse, repeat. At that point, me and Shane and a guy named Steve McKeon had a group that we called Fight Club. So Fight Club was we need a fund. We would meet for drinks once every month or so. And no one talked about Fight Club. So Fight Club became the thing that we talked about, that we slowly started circulating the idea of like, how about we just raise a fund? Enough of this capital formation stuff, enough of this regional organization, enough of getting state funders involved, enough of this, let's just raise a fund. So we started circulating Fight Club, and those meetings, similar to this, and these ones were more secret. These were people that we knew that exited companies, people who were high net worth individuals. We get invited to Fight Club, which no one talked about. And at some point, we're just like, yeah, let's just start the fund. We're getting tired of these capital formation meetings because they're just not going anywhere. And there's more to that. I don't want to throw anyone under the bus. In ecosystem development, there are so many stakeholders that it just takes long to do absolutely everything. And not everyone agrees on everything, and everyone has different incentives. So we're just like, well, everyone says we need it. We're just going to launch a fund. So we did. And no one thought we could. And that was, it was a very, very small fund, but no one thought it was possible. And we closed in like less than 6 months. We're 80% of the way there within the first month. So it's like the last couple months we're like sort of getting over the threshold to actually close, but we raised the majority of the money in the first couple of weeks from the people we've been talking to for a couple of years. Like, they were Fight Club. They were Fight Club members. The people that would show up at our informal, show up at the bar and talk about startup financing. And we just did it. It sort of just filled another gap in the ecosystem that existed. And this is what we always did, was what I did anyway, is like, there's a gap in the ecosystem, just go fill it. But once you fill that gap, it creates another problem. So it's like every time you fill a gap, another gap opens up. And it was always the challenge of keeping everything in balance, because it's like you can have a lot of capital, but there's no education, doesn't matter. A lot of education, no capital, a lot of smart people with good ideas, no funding. So it was always this idea that, okay, we have to have everything in a certain mix across the community, or else we're failing. Okay, we solved this. Okay, what problem now is the other thing that we have to focus our energy on? So there was this constant doing one thing, and there's another. At some point, we had enough success. We started seeing fragmentation, both in a good way and a bad way. Redefining Women in Tech had a program. So this Lauren Jerome actually started up this group called Redefining Women in Tech, to just talk about women in technology. A whole bunch of really, really big meetings that brought all the women that were working in tech together to talk about what it's like to work in Oregon as a woman in tech. Amazing group. And there were other splinter groups. There was a games group, and there was another group that went off and sort of did their own thing. So things started to fragment a little. So the community became a little less focused, and there was a niche food group, and there were CPG people, and there were the games people, and there were pure software people. It was kind of neat actually to see the fragmentation, but trying to keep the community together and create passageways between all the different splinter communities that were forming was sort of a new thing. It was really, really small. There were just like, everyone was in one place, and suddenly those conversations become so big that people just stop showing up at them. I mean, if you show up, there's like 100 people there, you don't feel like you have a voice. It's an interesting evolution. It was always like staying on top of, okay, what's happening now? We've had one level of success. What happens after this?
So you were getting a lot of people interested, relatively speaking, the size of the Eugene.
Yeah.
Right. How is that translating, I guess, into activity? Like, was it a lot of people interested, or was there a lot of activity resulting?
Well, the activity was sort of really, really organic, which is I've always struggled with trying to explain it to people.
Cool.
No, so what happened was we started to get some activity, and then I started to bring a bunch of my friends in who had exited, which like Shane and Jeff and people that were kind of semi-bored. Like they were doing stuff, but this got them sort of back into the game. They would come and mentor. And once there was some sort of high volume of stuff going on, they were coming in and meeting interesting people, and they were investing in small deals. And then this led to inviting more mentors in. They just started showing up because it was fun. We started doing mentor only gatherings. That was like sort of everyone's favorite, all the mentors, their favorite night of the year was mentor night. Like I hosted this dinner at a bar, and 30 people show up, and it was all these different mentors, a lot of them who hadn't known each other. And they'd come in, and it's like, it was kind of fun because they walk in the door like cock in the walk, I did all this. And then they meet someone else, and someone's like, they're kind of like, whoa, that guy did that. And everyone at that meeting was like that. And they're like, whoa, this is cool. Like these are my peers. And then the mentors started showing up, and they started to know each other, and they started referring deals. Someone would come to them, say, I don't know about this, but you should talk to this guy. So it's sort of a very natural network of mentors appeared that was seamless. And I no longer had to be the broker. Like I no longer had to be the guy that was in the middle of everything, the switchboard operator. The switchboard was happening naturally. Anybody in the community would meet with anyone else, and they'd get rooted to the right person. But it part of this is like, well, what do they need to do? It's like, well, I need to make it fun for the people that I considered my peers to show up.
Yeah.
And once I did that, everything sort of unlocked, because people were like, well, get involved in that community, and they're going to point you to wherever you need to go, as high as you need to go. And it was just super fun.
I feel that. I'm thinking back, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm just reflecting on what you're saying. When I was running we had a Start Fast, it was a for-profit fund accelerator. And it's only in retrospect that I really recognized the power of the interest of mentors and trying to create a greater network. Because like I'm just listening to what you're saying, like, yeah, Kelly and Jason know who I'm talking about. So Peter Dean and Matt Cusack would carpool every summer. It was the highlight of their summer. They would talk about it all year, and they would buy us dinner. They're volunteering. They would buy us dinner afterwards at one of the nicer restaurants because they were so amped up about coming out and doing it. I'm like, man, we could have tapped into that.
Because you see the evolution of them. It's like, I exited my company, and like that's what are you doing? They're like, snowboarding. Like a year later, like, what are you doing? They're like, snowboarding. 18 months in, like, what are you doing? Like, I'm still just snowboarding. Like, and at some point, you're like, yeah, and they just are like, okay, I did that. And it's like, it's like the half-life of an exited entrepreneur is like within 2 years, like all the things, like, now I have unlimited free time, I'm going to do all the things that I never had time to do. 18 months later, you're kind of like, what'd you do? It's like, well, I built a shop, and I built a machine shop, and I did these woodworking projects, and I did this thing for my wife, and I made a boat, and I, made a guitar from scratch, and, learned glass making, and made a stained glass window for my wife and my aunt and my grandmother and everyone in my family until I ran into people who make stained glass. At some point, you're just like, I thought I'd have be able to live the rest of my life, and no, it's a couple of years you kind of burn yourself out on all those activities, and you just get really, really bored, and you crave community, and you crave sort of peers, just people to hang out with and have fun. And what I was just like, man, let's help people grow startups because it's fun. And people are like, why? It's like, it's the only thing we know how to do. And at this point, it's sort of I'm in the startup community. The general entrepreneurship, I guess, I'm good at, but it's like, I'm a startup guy. It's like, what am I good at? I am good at helping people with startups. That's about the extent of what I'm good at. Other things, it's like, I'm just like, and my friends were like the same way, and some of them were like, they're not the best people. Wow. They're not that friendly. I mean, they're successful in their startups because they were hard chargers, And when you meet with them, they're usually very, very direct and very, very impatient. And it was sort of all like, meeting, collecting all those like-minded people together, a bunch of impatient hard chargers. They just have fun doing stuff. And the cool stuff is when they start doing stuff on their own without sort of you pushing them to do it. There's random stuff starts happening. And that's when you have something. And we got there. And then then it in the community building aspect, it just got a little weird. Everything I was doing got bigger, and there were multiple stakeholders involved, and it became political. And to me, it was just like I'm not that interested in that. I totally understood it. We were, like I say, a victim of our own success. We had a platform, and we got involved in economic development. And when you're getting involved in economic development, there are many more stakeholders. And when I was just doing it on my own, just me doing what I wanted to do and what I thought was right. But as more people get involved, they have opinions.
Before I go down
Harder
that,
and slower.
Jason's question about the fund. He said
the first one, the Coast to Crest Fund.
So presume, yeah, right, Jason, that's what you're talking about. Go ahead and ask him.
Yeah, first fund. I was just kind of curious of getting a fund off the ground. Really interesting experience. How many investors, like how many core people are in Fight Club, and what was the total amount of fund? What are the size of investments that you guys like to make?
Small fund, little over 2 million. We actually looked at it. We had known the deal flow in the community and said, what can we actually deploy on a yearly basis without spraying and praying being stupid? And we said, 400, 600K, let's raise 2 million. Okay. It was really based on the math of what can we deploy in our local area, because we're going to stick like right to the local area. We're Lane County around Eugene, and Eugene is like an island in the middle of a lot of forest. It was like, what we could do, could we deploy in this town? And it really was us circling around like how much we could deploy in deals without over capitalizing the system. That's what we raised. I don't remember the number of LPs, under 20, over 10. A couple big ones, a bunch of smalls. So there was one main anchor, and I can't disclose who they are. That's sort of part of the thing, is I can't disclose or even give hints, but there's one large anchor and a bunch of mediums and a bunch of smalls.
Great.
Not super hard to do, but it was really based on what could the community sustain. The business model itself was, we didn't take a management fee. The management fee was meant to pay for interns, so I actually didn't get paid to run that fund. Pure volunteer work. I get a carry, so it's a 220 fund, up to 2% in terms of fees. Those fees paid for all legal, our interns, which we paid $20 an hour to do really good work. And we worked closely with them, and then we'll get a carry at the exit. So it was like kind of a labor of love. For a fund that small, it's an easy labor of love. It doesn't take a lot of work, particularly now that we're in harvest mode. Like my work with Coast Crest Fund right now is,
well, you say it take a lot of work, but like you can tell leading up to that, all of that community building made that pop. Maybe it wasn't direct sort of roadshow, but I think you're giving yourself enough credit. Like that's
no, I did the work, but part of this is like the work that you do is the work. I mean, to me, it's personal. I mean, it's like, I was having fun, and to sort of leverage that or capitalize on it or be sharky about it, which is like, no, it needs this, and this is what the fund needs to look like. And this is what we need to sustain. And some of the people are trying to raise funds around, or trying to like, okay, how do you get a fund to work? So they're trying to raise in Oregon a $50 million fund focused on Oregon at that point. And like I said, 2013, 2014, it's like, no way.
Oh, wow.
You're going to stick in Oregon, not going to happen. So you start thinking about what's the size of fund can actually have a real salary. And you get into this really weird space where it's like, well, you're going to go bigger, or you're going to be more regional, or you're going to be Pacific Northwest, and you aren't going to do seed. The gap here is not in the bigger rounds. The gap here is at seed level. So what really needs to happen is a seed fund, and there were already some seed funds out there. Portland Seed Fund was good, Rogue was good, but there just wasn't enough. So it's just, how do we just get more seed capital in there? And it's really, really hard to sort of raise a bigger fund and not be sloppy. I mean, really, that was really like, so the choice was, if it's 200, I mean, I was thinking, it's like, what's the fee going to be? And for Shane and I were like, that fee is almost like not worth talking about. It's like a pain in the ass for tax purposes. Like,
Yeah.
why take a salary from it? It's not going to support us. And at that point, it was mostly me and Shane, and I was running the accelerator at the time anyway. And there was other issues involved, which was having two jobs, and if I was getting paid with this, was this me double dipping? There's all that weird kind of stuff that was going on. It's just like, no, it's a side project. And it was super easy. I mean, it was hard. I mean, there was a lot of extra work involved at certain times, but it wasn't like fully all encompassing 60-hour week launching a fund. It was a side thing we're doing.
Yeah, well, but even still, you're touching on like what was really the topic of that conversation before, Ben, around angel funds, where it's like when you just start looking at the incentive structure around having a fund, where you're like, I'm going to be a professional investor, kind of have a fund. You're right. It's like it can be often super out of whack with where the companies are in those ecosystems.
Well, this is kind of this whole idea around when you have a local ecosystem in a place like upstate New York or Oregon, it has to be subsidized to some extent. Because people came to me when I was running the accelerator, and the accelerator is being funded by the state. And there was a lot of talk about making it a seed fund accelerator. And there's like, seed fund accelerator that's serving companies in Eugene, Oregon? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We're like, well, what do you think about running a seed fund accelerator? It's like, I could certainly start a seed fund accelerator. It wouldn't be too hard for me to do that. They're like, well, where would you launch it? I'm like, well, I'd go to Portland or Seattle. They're like, so in order to make this work, you'd leave town. I'm like, yeah. If you want me to run this as a business model that's wholly run as a business model, why on earth would I choose Eugene, Oregon?
Yeah.
I would go to a place where there's actually deal flow. I mean, sorry. The idea is there's not enough deal flow here yet. There needs to be something that actually sort of makes the deal flow come here, that makes it worthwhile, which means somebody's got to subsidize it. But if you're asking me to take the risk and to put a seed fund together or an accelerator together in Eugene, it's just like, no, that's silly. That's silly. There's easier ways for me to make money. So if you're just actually putting me in the hot seat saying, okay, you have to make this work in order to pay your own salary, and you have to raise the fund to run the accelerator, it's like, well, I'm not going to make it hard on myself for the sake of being in the town that I'm in.
Yeah.
It became this whole sort of from innovative seed fund models. It's like a portion of seed funds, if you're in the middle of community trying to grow your community, it's about the community. And this is sort of the big disconnect. And I always had this argument with people, which is like, this isn't all about me. This is about the community. The community benefits when there's startups here.
Yep.
The community should invest because you're going to be the recipients of this. And this is part of well, how does that work? Like, actually, it works like this. 70% of all commerce is local. It's local sector. 30% is traded sector. The money comes in, it gets captured in the cycle. That 70% of money just circles around the community and doesn't leave. The more you grow the pie in terms of traded sector, the bigger that 70% gets, and all the services sector locally actually thrive. This is how it works. If you want that to happen, here's how it works. And then there was a lot of these really weird conversations where people just don't get it. I was always trying to explain the games community. They're like, okay, so you put a community in, and to them it was very mechanical. You take a company in, you do a couple things to it, and that company then grows from 3 people to 10 people, all of them. So it's like, if you bring in 10 companies, then each one of them should grow from 2 people to 8 people over the course. You're like, no, that's not how it's going to work. Most of them are going to be dead, and one's going to be a couple hundred people in a couple years. And they're like, whoa, they just didn't get it. I always kept pointing back to Dynamics, which was like, I came from Dynamics, which is a 250-person game company, which when it closed spawned my company, Garage Games, Buzz Monkey, Pipeworks, and still in Eugene, we still have a couple hundred game developers. We're talking since the mid 80s until now. There's been a couple hundred game developers working full-time on big name projects that you've probably heard of, but no one in Eugene that recognizes it's happening there. I mean, it's going on 40 years, 30 years, 40 years, 30, a long time. So you're thinking of the amount of revenue, traded sector capital coming in from that one company that led to all these other companies. I'm like, this is how that works. We don't know what it's going to be. We do know that impact is long-term. And these people tend to stay here and have kids here and build houses here, and they're making really good money. It was.
You touched on a couple of points though too. I want to bring back to, as you were talking about the accelerator, which I thought were particularly interesting for community builders. And there was one was sort of from the personal perspective of saying, like, I want to do this stuff, but at the same time, do I need to be a martyr in order to like make that work? like what's the financial model for me that aligns? And then the second piece of that was also this somewhat chicken and the egg situation, as you were saying, where like you kind of have to play the subsidized game until the markets sort of make sense, but how do you do that without sort of sacrificing all of the things that are important to even be successful? And you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, when it all started out, it was just very much a volunteer effort because I wanted to see something cool in my community. I mean, really, I was in this community. My kids were young. I wasn't planning on leaving. And I was just bored. And I wanted something to happen. I was like kind of looking for my next startup. So I just started doing the stuff. Really was no expectation that it was going to pay me to do it. The expectation was going to find something to do. And I would start a business. After a couple of years, it became my full-time job. I mean, I was meeting with people 40 hours a week. This is before I started accelerators. Like, it was a full-time job. 10 meetings a day with people, all of them in startups. And at some point I'm like, hey, I'm spending more than all of my time helping this community, figuring out how to turn this into, like, it was this balance of like, I'm either gonna have to ramp this way down or figure out how to make it a thing that pays me. And then Rain came along, which gave me a paycheck. And so when it started, it was like, well, this is an opportunity to make, do what we need to do with some funding. Like, I was getting a paycheck. And after a couple of years of that, it was just like, okay, my it's a paycheck. It covers my burn. But at that point, it's like covering your burn is, if you want to make this a permanent thing that you're doing, is not something that you should expect someone to do. And I think that was sort of the expectation. Is like, well, that should be good enough for you. And part of it's like, well, it's not. And the flip side, it's like, I don't want to say on camera how much I'm going to be making.
I get it.
It's a lot more, it's significantly a lot more than what I was making doing community building. And so now I'm back in the private sector launching a new fund, and it's like night and day in terms of compensation. And this has been the challenge. I didn't get into it to get compensation, but at some point you're like, hey, if you want me to keep doing this, and I was doing a good job. I mean, everyone thinks I was doing a really good job, but it was like, at some point, if you want me to keep doing this, we got to figure out a way for me to keep doing this. And some of this was the value that you kind of put together, and you recognize that you've built something that no one else can do. So after 13 years, I'm like, okay, I know how funding works. I know how accelerators work. I've done my own startups. I know how to do university ecosystems. I know how to do town ecosystems. I understand all these different things work. I understand how state ecosystems work. And now I understand all these pieces. Who else around me do I know that knows, oh my God, there's like 5 or 6 people in the United States that kind of have the depth of experience in all these different areas. And I understand all the challenges, and oh my God, this is important work. You sort of recognize like, oh God, if I walk away, this falls apart. You end up in this really weird situation where you're just like, huh, if I walk away, it falls apart, and we don't have a succession plan. And me being me was just like, I had at the time the capacity to do it and the desire to do it, and having a community that wants to grow a startup ecosystem dependent upon a guy like me saying, yeah, I'll work for free for 5 years.
Yeah.
And throw 60 hours a week into it and make it my mission. That's what's going to bring that's what we expect startup communities, how they're centered around that individual that's decided to take that leap. That's kind of lame and non-sustainable.
Totally agree with you. And honestly, in large part, and from our conversations over the past year or so, a little bit before this, particularly the past year, I've been very much pushing in our region against that mentality, especially when you're in I say air quotes nonprofit, because it's like, okay, the mission of the nonprofit is making people wealthy. So it's like, okay, you're not saving baby seals, but like, you should have a model that makes sense for the people and incentivizes them. That's more sustainable, like something work. Like
it is, but part of the challenge, and this is, oh God, we only have a couple minutes left. This is the big challenge, is that people, what makes startup community successful is, I would say it's almost like scaling a platform software business. It's like the platform versus pipes. A lot of people in economic development see this like a machine. You put something in, you do some stuff to it, and out the other end comes a thing. A program is what they want, a sustainable program that's easy to understand. And you're like, no, this is more like a platform play. You're trying to balance all these things. It's a double-sided market, and you're constantly trying to balance supply and demand of all these different needs. And what does that is not a fund or not a mentorship program or not a startup weekend. Those are all components of it. What it actually takes is switchboard operators, super connectors, going around connecting the dots, testing the wind, see where the gaps are, see where the community is at, and trying to fill those gaps in real time. And some of this is like, well, how do you sustain that financially? It's like, I don't know if there is a model other than people saying, if we want that sort of connectivity, which happens naturally in Silicon Valley or places that have a lot of density of entrepreneurs, if you want that sort of connectivity, you have to have someone doing that. And if that's their full-time job, something needs to support that. And if the community wants it, the community's got to figure out how to pay for it. Because if you're saying, hey, person, figure out your own business model, and I'm dealing with it right now, because people for the longest time saying, hey, Joe, if you want to keep doing this, figure out your business model, which is like, I figured it out my own business model right now. It's like most of the emails that I get archived immediately. Like I'm busy and I don't like to blow people off, but I just, I think I now have like 187 LinkedIn requests that are just like sitting there and I don't even have time to like, who wants to connect with me? And then that's the unfortunate nature of things right now. It's just like, I love doing the work, but I have to focus on, refilling the money bucket. And so I'm out of, not totally out of the cycle of ecosystem building or startup community building, but unfortunately have to focus on making a business model that works for me, which will impact communities, but not as directly as I was doing before, which is unfortunate. And that's
well, quick poll to everybody's on, because this is an interesting area, and be candid. Like no one's feelings hurt. This is like, all right, if I'm going to put effort into putting this event together or marketing it, I want to make sure that there's an interest. Would you be interested in continuing this topic? Because I'm kind of interested in like a follow-on conversation, just a discussion point on this. Okay, I already got one yes. I was going to ask for hands raised of like, all right, you're going to do this kind of stuff. Business models, how do you make the finances work? What could we be? Okay, cool. Get more of a yes. Others, raise hands of interest. Oh, wow. Okay, cool. All right, then we're going to do it. We'll set the next one up. Joe, I want to brainstorm with you how to make that
capture this. Yeah, some of this is like a bunch of interesting discussions. Like that succession plan one that popped into my head was the questionnaire was like, succession plan, we didn't have one. We didn't think of one.
Yeah.
Didn't think it was necessary.
I like that. Yeah, I because this is something that's interesting to me precisely for all the reasons we just touched upon. Just like the in some, I don't want to say the fate, maybe that's too extreme, but in some ways the fate of the community's growth kind of depends on it, right? I mean,
well, like, but that puts too much weight on me. I mean, this is sort of the, when we talk succession plans, it's like, hey, I exited a startup. I randomly started doing stuff in my community, mostly on my own dime. And then like 10 years later, I'm like, I can't sustain this anymore. So I'm not going to do it anymore. Bye, everyone. And everyone's like, shame on you for not having a succession plan. And I'm like, succession plan? I randomly was just doing stuff that I found interesting until I couldn't anymore.
Yeah, but when I'm looking at it, like, take yourself out of it for a second. Let's like, community builders looking at it like across the country and saying, all right, if there's a strategy that could be played, is it to the benefit of all communities to incentivize people like that in those communities? Just probabilistically speaking, it's like, yeah.
Hell yeah.
So then,
it is. It is, but then it became this discussion is, which is sort of like, I was weirded out in some of these discussions, which is like, oh, if you're planning on leaving, who's going to take your place? I'm like, I don't know. What do I care? I mean, like, I'm done here. I can't do this anymore, and nobody's really supporting me, so this is done. Or like, at least my part of it's done. It's like, how is this going to be replaced? I'm like, I don't know. I don't care. I didn't.
It sounds very similar to open source problem. It's open source, it's free, it's open, and then suddenly IBM or someone else wants to come in, own it, and formalize it. It's like, whoa, time out. That's not the same dynamic, right? You've completely messed up just by formalizing.
Well, it was the thing. It's like, hey, I'm doing this mostly for free. So you're going to add another layer of work on top of me based on all of my free volunteer effort to come up with a succession plan? Right. No, I mean, the succession plan, it's like, there needs to be a succession plan because the rest of the community is not figuring out a way to fund this in a way that will allow me to do this without constantly trying to figure out where the money's coming from. You know, the succession plan is easy. Pay me enough, I'll do this forever. And then I'll start thinking more serious about it. Don't pay me.
Yeah,
The
clearly you
succession
suck
plan-
at retiring, so you will be there.
The succession plan really for me was like, succession plan is the amount of money that's coming into my pocket from the community is approaching close to zero. So the value of this to the community and everything here and the importance of it is probably close to zero. So me stopping doing it is a loss of what? No one should care, right? Oh, people are like, no, this is going to severely impact the community. I'm like, well, if it's going to impact the community and you're recognizing the value, then how come we can't attach a dollar amount to that value? Like, so far the dollar amount is so small that it's like it's not that interesting. It's a small amount that allows me to pay my bills. Not interesting. It's not a growth opportunity. It's not a career I would choose. And if it goes away, everybody freaks out. I'm like, well, the value was placed upon it was zero. It certainly can't be that valuable. If you know, not enough for me to put any energy into creating a succession plan for myself. You know, that to me are like all my frustrations about startup community building is just like, I'm not the one who should be worried about succession. And I mean, I left my town at some point. It's like I'm like, I'm done here. Nothing for me to do here anymore. Sort of ran the whole gamut of what I could do there, and then it was just start a new startup there or not. And I chose like, yeah, not a place that I wanted to start up. And it was like the big jokes, like do a startup here. I'm like, who am I going to get for a mentor and where am I going to get startup funding? I talk to myself in the mirror. You know, it's like this goofy thing. It's like, no, that's not that interesting to me to actually be in this isolated bubble without a large peer group. I actually want to grow. And in order to do that, I'm not getting what I need here. I have to leave, you know, in order for myself to grow. It's unfortunate, but that's sort of what happened to me. It's just like, okay, time for me to move on. And you know, the ecosystem now in Oregon is changing, constantly morphing, as all ecosystems do, as people ebb and, you know, come in and come out. And I don't know if it'll ever be any different. I don't know if that'll change. But I gotta run because I'm actually late for my next call.
Okay, thank you, Joe. We're
problem.
gonna have a follow-up talk on that topic among other ones. So I already put the link into the Twitter. If you're not already on the email list, add it. We'll see you next time.
Hopefully this was good for you guys. It was kind of fun.
Joe, thank you so much. That was great.
I love it,
No problem.
man. See you.
Thanks.
Bye.